Breaks and proprioception. So this section is about, first of all, gaining the confidence that when you jump into a handstand, you can stop yourself. In other words, when we're jumping, we're moving in a direction. And in order for you to balance in a handstand or whatever it is that you're doing, you need to be able to stop your momentum. And it seems very, very obvious, but I've seen lots of students make this mistake of jumping into a handstand or some other type of arm balance thingamabobber, and their hands come right off the ground. So that obviously is no good unless you're trying to work on a one-armed handstand. Jump into it, which would be really awesome. Or not, depending on what happened. But the whole idea is that I'm going to, first, the previous series was about strength and alignment, so I'm going to have my body held in the correct position, and then I'm going to shift my weight over my hands and stop the weight, okay? So stop the body from shifting anymore. So that's what this practice is going to be about. So it's building on all of those activations that we just did with our hands and our shoulders, and then doing it more dynamically. In other words, that we're stabilizing as the body is moving. And I like to start by just walking. And a lot of times we just skip this step and go right into jumping and using a lot of momentum, and that's not a really good way to learn how to put the brakes on and stabilize. You want to slowly shift and stabilize, and see how the shape sort of changes as you move. So we're going to start from downward facing dog. So in your downward facing dog, don't worry so much about your hips and your legs for now. We're going to focus only on shoulders and wrists. So from downward facing dog, we're going to come into more of a handstand setup where your arms will be sort of halfway between down dog and plank. And then from there, I'm going to activate the wrist. So pull the fingertips back, press into the palm, knuckles, and the outer hand, and lift the heel. Squeeze the backs of the armpits. Push the back body up, push the hips down. So from here, I'm pressing the ground away from me, and then I'm going to tiptoe in, and as you can see, as I come closer, the angle of my elbow to hand changes, and this is more of sort of a handstand. And then I'm going to tiptoe back. So I'm moving in this direction and stabilizing. I'm going to walk in and stabilize, walk in and stabilize, walk in and stabilize, and then walk back. So if you're doing this correctly, it's exhausting. You're going to walk in. This is probably the hardest part. Walk back. Walk in. Walk back. So the initial piece of the handstand of jumping, from bringing your feet onto from the ground all the way up to over your hips, that's going to be the most effort. So actually when you're in the handstand, if you have good alignment, if you're not moving too much, the handstand is going to be much more relaxing, much less work for your body than the actual transition into the handstand. That's probably the most work for your body. So that was our first step. The next step is to leave the ground with your feet and resist. So I'm not trying to balance here. What I'm trying to do is to stop myself and actually push myself back. So as I said in the last section, you always want to have, until your feet are on the ground, that your arms are active and pushing the floor away, so that that piece of the puzzle, that where the weight is in the body, is very, very stable. The hips can come back down. So same exercise I was just doing, I'll come into this shape halfway between plank and downward facing dog. I'm going to activate here, activate the hands and fingers, activate the shoulders, push the back up, walk in about 6 inches, and then I'm going to leave the ground and push myself back. So again, the main point here is is that the shoulders and the wrists were active the whole time, and I felt the momentum come forward. I resisted all the way back to the position, okay? So as I said with last one, don't worry so much about your hips and your legs. This is what we're going to focus on, is all about shoulders and wrists. So again, when you leave the ground, you should feel confident that you can stop yourself, okay? If you don't, you shouldn't leave the ground. That's the bottom line. So come back. I seem very authoritative there, don't I? So coming back, activate everything. Activate the hands, activate the wrists. Lift the back, bend the knees, come up, back, up, back, up, back, up, back, rest. Whew. That's hard work. Again, that is sort of the main work of the handstand. You don't want to be jumping up, falling all over the place, or not really sure of what you're doing. You want to be very, very precise. So the only thing that should change in a perfect world from where I'm jumping from to the handstand is the elbow. The elbow was back, now it's here. That's where we want to stop it, okay? So developing that breaks is really, really important. So that's shoulders and wrists. You can stay on that, you can play with that. Don't do it to the point where you feel really sort of fatigued and the wrists are aggravated. Take rests in between. A big part of handstand practice, quality over quantity. So now let's talk about what the hips are doing while we do this. So you're in more of a, when you're jumping from your handstand, we'll talk in the next section about handstand split, but for now, just jumping from 2 feet and getting sort of the fundamentals of the shoulders and the hips. So when we're jumping in our handstand, we're in a bit of a bent knee position. So you can think of this as maybe like reverse tabletop position. Actually, let's start from seated. So maybe downward facing dog here. So in your downward facing dog, and this may not be, depending on your hamstrings, you may not be able to sort of sit in this position. You can sit on a bolster, bend your knees a bit here, and then think here about activating the glutes. So pushing your hips forward, and you'll feel that the back body hollows out, and then driving the tailbone down. So this is not only important for sort of activating the muscles in transverse abdominis, in the lower abdominals, but also of direction. So when we start to activate that, you feel sort of the line from the shoulder to the hip is very, very straight, right? And so that's going to give us a good sort of proprioceptive tool as we start to jump into the handstand, as we start to, okay, I've got my brakes, I'm shifting. Now, where do I shift to? Shoulders come over the wrists, and then the hips should follow right in line. So this should keep me really, really stable. So again, I'm pushing the glutes forward in this direction, driving the tailbone down. Eventually, I'm in this handstand position. So coming onto my back, same thing here. Knees are bent. Arms are up over the head. Push the back down. I'm going to lift the glutes and drive the tailbone in this direction. So if I'm walking forward with my hand, or if I'm walking forward with my feet to my hands, the hips are almost pulling in the opposite direction. Actually, they are. They're not almost pulling in the opposite. They're pulling in the opposite direction, because when you jump into your handstand, you want your handstand line to be long. You don't want it to be really compressed and collapse. So we want it to be long and light. So we're going to repeat the first 2 exercises again. First walking and then jumping. So you're going to come into downward facing dog. I'm going to come halfway in between down dog and plank. Resist with the hands. Activate the wrists. Activate the shoulders. Lift the back. Bend the knees. Now I'm activating the hips. So I'm going to push the butt down, drive the tailbone back. So as I'm walking in, the tailbone's actually reaching in the other direction and walking back. And this actually makes this a little bit lighter for me. So again, activate, resist with the shoulder girdle. Reach back with the hips. Push the glute down. Try 3 more. Whew. And that is really, really difficult work. That's the bones of it. That's really the work most of the time is often harder than the actual skill. So once all of that stuff is working and active, this is sort of an exaggerated experience. But once that stuff is firing in the way that it needs to, then the pose becomes a lot lighter. So now we're going to jump using all of those activations, and the goal is not to balance. If you do balance, that's totally fine, but balance would be a product of all of these activations and you putting on the brakes in the right spot, okay? So don't make balance a priority, but we'll see what happens. So coming into your downward facing dog, you're gonna bring your shoulders again halfway to the hands. I'm going to activate the wrists, turn the arm bones down, lift the back, push the butt in. Gonna walk in about 6 inches, come up. Ooh, here, back. That wasn't a good example there. Shift, lift the back, push the butt down. Come up, come back. Again, shift, resist. Back down. One more, up, activate. Oh, too much. Back down, relax. Take a breath. So you see though how the hands can fall out, right? So it's a lot of the work. I'm jumping back a little bit further than I normally would, but a lot of that work is just stabilizing the weight, stabilizing the hands, doing those activations, and then keeping the body in the right position. So take a couple of moments and relax, release. We're going to do 2 final movements here to finish off this section. So this is called our tuck forward bend. And so in your tuck forward bend, we're trying to be really round with our back. Keep that roundness and keep compression of the legs into the body. So I'm going to come up like this and then back down. I'm keeping maximum flexion here and maximum compression with my legs into the body. You can be on your fingertips. You can do this on blocks. You can modify in the way that you need to. Again, what's important is the shape of the back and the legs squeezing into the body. So then finally, our last exercise here is coming into a tuck jump. And the goal again isn't to balance, but the goal is technique and breaks. So I'm going to set up closer now. So this is a much more of a position of where I would jump from. I'm going to have my shoulders slightly behind the hands. So I'm going to roll into the balance point really slowly. And then right away when I bring my hands onto the ground, I'm starting to resist. I'm pushing the ground away here. Squeezing and compressing. So you can start slowly by coming up and down, and then eventually you're balancing, or you're, should I say, jumping into the position. So when you jump into the position, think about activating all of these activations here. Lifting the back, pressing the ground away, lifting the hips, pushing the butt forward, coming back down. Let's try 5 of these repetitions. Up and down, up and down, up and down. Rest here. And we'll finish off this series with 2 more rounds of that. So jumping in and out of tuck. And so again, let me just do one more demonstration of this. So if you're not balancing yet, that's completely fine. What we're focusing on is brakes and proprioception. So the brakes being the hands, shoulders stable, and the hips closed. And so your hops could be just this. But I'm keeping the legs really tight into the body. And eventually, we're building the strength and awareness to come up into the position, okay? So first, brakes and proprioception. So knowing how to stabilize the body, knowing where the body is, what shape it's in, and then the balance will come naturally.